The direction agriculture is headed in is where we don't fertilize the field, we fertilize the plant.
Sustainable agriculture, to become profitable, environmentally sound, and socially acceptable, means that we have to look at proper inputs of chemicals, of financial resources, land, and labor. We've got to help farmers stay in business.
If we don't have good food, clean water, and fresh air, we're all in trouble.
Agriculture, probably the most essential human activity, is constantly evolving in response to both human and environmental needs. To be permanent and sustainable, farms and ranches have to be a good fit with their environment. They have to hang on to soil, nutrients, and water, letting nothing be wasted. Farms are vital living systems, not just factories. By encouraging biological rhythms and subtle interactions, many farmers have found they can prevent pollution both off the farm and on, turning a good profit at the same time. They are blending the new with the old, using both high-tech and horse sense to go with the flow of natural systems rather than trying to overpower them.
To a certain extent, with conventional agriculture, we've really tried to put in place farming systems that would maximize the gross sales, maximize the production. And then when nature resisted those systems, we tried to come up with ever new ways to override nature. So if we wanted to grow corn on the same ground year after year after year to maximize corn production, well, if nature resisted that with corn rootworms and low fertility, then we'd develop a product that the farmer could buy to overcome that problem.
Erosion is a problem that has to be solved on the farm. When soil gets away, it is not only the farmer's problem, but a problem for all of us.
Annually, there is damage to the tune of about $15 billion arising from soil that leaves cropland and ends up in irrigation canals, in reservoirs, in harbors, and has to be dredged and removed.
We really have shallow soils in northeast Iowa. And these soils, this is probably a Floyd Clyde, very highly prone to erosion, even if there's not a lot of slope in the land. So the reason to be conscientious about soil erosion here is that we won't have an agriculture left if we're not.
Erosion is only one of the potential impacts from agriculture. Others include destruction of wildlife habitat, nutrient runoff, and groundwater contamination. There are also social impacts from conventional farming.
In the next 10 years, about 50% of all farm assets are going to be turning over in our rural communities. Only 1% of our farmers are under age 25, and we're basically on a crisis point right now. And it's going to be, the next 10 to 15 years is going to be the big transition. And it is going to be the cliff, meaning are we going to fall off that cliff or are we going to build a bridge?
Farmers all over the country are making changes that protect our health, their health, and the health of the environment. The good news is that productivity and permanence in farming are not necessarily opposites. That's what this program is about, good sense farming that will continue to return a profit year after year.
When we were farming conventionally a number of years ago, it seemed like that everything except the crop plant that was out in the field was the enemy, and we had this sort of like sterilized mentality. Whereas now it's almost like everything can be an ally when looked in the right way.
I figured that out. We could throw a cultivator away every year. Just use it one year and throw it in the junk for what we saved on herbicide costs. You know, so year by year we make a change or two, and each one we look at, generally we try to look at how is it going to generate its payments through our own operation.
I planted it about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and an hour after I planted it, we had 3.5 inches of rain. If the field would have been clean tilled, I'm sure that I would have lost substantially more soil, and I probably would have had to replant the entire field. So by utilizing the residue, we probably save the crop.
I think the farmer of the future is going to have to farm more with his head. He's going to have to be more sensitive to the individual characteristics of the land that he farms. The farmer of the future is going to need more information in order to use inputs more wisely and produce a product at lower cost in a way that's more sensitive to the environment.
When you think about it, America's environment is largely farms and ranches, more than half of it, in fact. Much of our wildlife depends on that farmland for habitat. About 80% of the water we consume as a country is used on our farms. Looking at America through the window of an airplane, we see an incredible variety of soils, water availability, and weather that affect thousands of decisions being made down below. Decisions about what to grow, when to plant, and how to take care of the soil. The quality of those decisions is directly related to the quality of our water and the quality of our land. We traveled throughout the country to visit farms that are both environmental and economic successes. Paul Buxman operates a small orchard in Southern California where he has become an expert in the biological control of pests.
As long as we've got enough of these flying in, I don't think we have to worry. Once they have a hand lens, then, boy, the whole world opens up to them. If somebody tells them it's time to spray, well, is it? This will tell you. This is like the Consumer Reports, magazine before you go out and buy, okay? This means you can go out and for yourself determine, well, how bad is my infestation? And what do I really need to spray? When you have mites attacking your tree, all you need is one specific predator for those mites to 10 mites, and you're under biological control. We saw our first western tanager in here since we came to the farm. It's a bright red and orange bird.
Oh my goodness.
It looks like it's totally out of place on this farm. It looks like a flying popsicle.
Although he does use pesticides when necessary, Buxman manages weeds as a cover crop and a diverse habitat for beneficial insects.
Weeds have small blossoms you hardly notice. And all of those blossoming plants attract beneficial insects because all the beneficials eat two things. They eat, first they like pollen, and they prefer that as a food source more than anything else. But then they like meat. And it's sort of meat and potatoes, that's what they go for. The potato would be represented by the pollen, and the meat, of course, are other bugs. The bad bugs, on the other hand, are vegetarian. They're rascals. They come in and eat the roots, they eat the wood, they eat the fruit, I mean, nothing against vegetarians, but boy, when it comes to a bug, you prefer the meat eaters. You want carnivores out there. And it just so happens that the more pollen you can provide on your ranch, the more beneficial insects you're going to have. And they always say these weeds compete for nutrition and water. So in a drought year, aren't you using twice the water? And what they always forget is that the weeds break down, decompose, and become humus, which absorbs and holds water. There's going to be a place for healthily grown products that don't disturb the environment, but use some synthetic fertilizers, but not much, or synthetic pesticides, but not very much. They spot treat. But ultimately, their drawing card is going to be it tastes better, it's higher nutrition.
For the Sills family in Northern California, crop rotation is the centerpiece in a variety of strategies that provide fertility and pest control with very few off-farm purchases. Using a rotation appropriate for his conditions, Sills taps into the free nitrogen fertilizer that certain plants can pull right out of the air.
We don't use anything, any chemical inputs at all. In fact, we don't use any inputs in most cases. We just use a vetch cover crop plow down plus incorporated rice straw from the year before, from 2 years before, to provide fertility. And this method is probably about at least $100 an acre less costly than the conventional inputs for rice. So it pencils out very well for us. The end result, I think, is really to have more control over our lives and over our farm as far as its economic destiny and whether we'll be around to keep farming.
Driving through the country's corn belt, one can see corn and soybeans stretching abundantly over the horizon. But there are ecological drawbacks to monoculture. Soil structure deteriorates, pests have an easy time gaining a foothold, and when a natural crisis occurs, the whole crop can be lost at one time. Some Iowa farmers are experimenting with a system called strip intercropping that puts diversity back into the fields. Farmers using this method have reduced erosion, reduced fertilizer and pesticide inputs, and increased yields all at the same time.
The strip intercropping system much more efficiently utilizes the resources that we have available, those resources that don't cost us anything: sunlight, water, and the soil. The reason that we think this system works: number one, corn is a special high photosynthetically active crop. It utilizes sunlight very well, and when you look at the edge of the corn strip, you see an outside row on each side that is not competing with other crops that are tall for sunlight. Therefore, we have high yields on the edges of the corn. The oats are not a high photosynthetically active crop, but the unique thing about oats, or any small grain, is that they're planted early. They're planted a month earlier than the corn or the soybeans, which means the outside rows of the oat strip are not competing for resources. They have all the sunlight, all the water, all of everything they need. It's kind of like the way people plant gardens a lot of times. If you have crops that are companions that complement their growth habit one versus the other, you can come out better on both ends, and that's kind of what we're working into this system.
The corn yield has been very good. The bean yields last year were the best we ever had. Last year was not a real good year for small grains. But the effect of the system is that the yields of corn is increased, and it's helping to make the system more economically viable. And one of the reasons it's more viable is that I'm using less inputs at the same time. This farming system is not as difficult as what it may appear. I was able to implement it on my farm and enjoy the benefits of it with really no additional purchases of equipment and no modifications. The row spacing was laid out because it's on ridges and was rather easy to implement.
So all in all, for me, it was a no-lose situation. It was all gain. If I could increase my corn, keep the same number, I kept the same number of acres of each crop. It just turned it into a different way of growing it. Instead of growing large block fields, we grew strip fields.
Like strip cropping, ridge tillage brings the garden right out into the field, using a concept that closely resembles the raised bed technique familiar to many gardeners. Because the ridges are permanent, the heavy wheels of farm machinery always drive in the same place and don't compact the soil structure where crops are growing.
Next year in the spring, I will come along and I will plant these soybeans on this ridge without any tillage. The planter will shave the weed seeds away from the ridge with a sweep, and that will help with weed control. And the fact that the ridge is elevated, it will be warmer and drier and more suitable for earlier planting. And it follows very well with the crop like soybeans. The beans planted on a ridge, and beans being a legume that don't like having wet foot, the beans perform well on ridges. And they're very easy and very economical to grow. So we're doing a lot of cultural common sense things here.
This system is more diversification. We are going against the trend that has been established in the 80s. It's just a case of overcoming momentum that previously existed.
In America's high plains region, where water is scarce, topsoil is thin, and the weather can be severe, innovative farmers are hedging their bets by using good timing, precision applications, and good management of crop residues.
We're just putting just enough chemical for not just enough nutrients for the crop to take. And this is what you call spoon feeding the crop. In generalities, why you will be cutting our chemical cost over a half, and I would say almost to 2/3 of what a normal application would be costing us. Not only does this really is economically feasible, but when you put the nutrients in exactly where the plant wants, one thing we do get is quality. Quality of the product and the nutritional value. It goes in exactly where you want it.
These concrete ditches have sure helped us save
Oh,
water.
they have tremendous.
What I enjoy the most about farming, I guess, is the management end of it, the wheeling, the dealing, the handling of the money, the keeping of the records, making decisions that show up either in a better product or more money. And as well as taking care of the environment, taking care of the farm, because the farm's got to take care of me. A study that was done about 10 years ago showed that the water leaving my farm is of better quality than what's already in the river, and I'm very proud of that fact. In the last 10 years since I have been reducing my tillage, I've seen my yields increase by as much as 25%. And also, the quality of my soil structure has increased dramatically. My organic matter has gone up. I use less water than I used to, so I am saving a lot of water, which is very, very important. And the economic bottom line is really why I continue to do it, because it works.
Cooperative efforts among farmers can sometimes work to everyone's benefit. In the Lubbock, Texas area, cotton growers are pooling their resources to grow and market their crop more effectively. Working with the state of Texas, the cotton growers have funded a research center called AgCares that provides information on sustainable cotton production.
Cotton as a crop does not produce enough plant residue to prevent wind erosion and meet the requirements of conservation compliance of the 1985 Farm Bill. Therefore, we're growing cotton and wheat residue to obtain the residue levels necessary to meet those requirements. The yield differences with cotton growing in wheat stubble routinely are jumped to about 20 to 30% over conventional cropping systems of this area of sandy soils. Primarily, this enhancement is due to physical wind effect on the growing plant through the season.
Another Texas innovation is precision application of water. Rather than spray irrigate, losing water by evaporation, the LIPA system uses hanging tubes to put the water right to the root zone. Virginia producer Lewis Ashton has the distinction of farming one of the oldest family farms in the country, land that was ceded to his ancestors by King George before 1670. In recent years, nutrients and sediments from livestock operations and fertilizer runoff have been contributing factors in the environmental decline of the Chesapeake Bay. To help prevent further problems, Ashton keeps a careful accounting system of his nutrients.
Well, every acre of land we have on this farm here drains directly or indirectly into the Potomac River, which eventually feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. What I'm trying to do here is keep what fertilizer, what pesticides that I do use here on the farm. I paid for the stuff and I want to keep it right here at home. I went to this system of strip farming in 1984 to keep the water that was running across this field at high rates after big rains from washing my fields into the woods over there. I have grass waterways on the bottoms of all my hills adjacent to any streams or adjacent to where water runs off my farm. These grass waterways slow the water down, collect more nutrients from the water going off the farm, feed that grass, which in turn I harvest that grass for hay and use it to feed my cattle. Timing is important in fertilizer application. It's really no use to put that fertilizer out there until the plant needs it. If you go out there and put all the nitrogen on in the beginning and you have a big storm and a lot of runoff, or that nitrogen seeps down into the ground, you end up losing the nitrogen. By coming back and putting 30% on to begin with and 70% on at what we call lay-by time, you put the nitrogen out there exactly when the corn needs it. I feel like what I'm doing here is sort of the ultimate in recycling. By using sewage sludge and poultry manure, I'm bringing back onto the land what would ordinarily be a waste product and using it to feed my crops.
In ecologically sensitive southern Florida, some growers are finding ways to effectively manage two resources that are abundant in their area, wildlife and water. Among the tools they are now using is satellite imagery that reveals nature's age-old signatures for soil types and drainage patterns. The goal is to integrate wetlands, wildlife habitat, and agriculture into a single, diverse mosaic.
This one right here is a rookery. We've had several years where there have been thousands of birds nesting in that particular reservoir inside this orange grove. We do not develop drainage systems, we develop water management systems. The key is to put the water where we need it, when we need it, and yet not let it get away from us. That water table will go up and down with the natural rainfall. If we don't drain that off, we hold it on site, that water has the opportunity to soak back into the ground and recharge the aquifers below.
Collier's management strategy of letting wetlands remain in place and planting only where soil conditions are just right has yielded comparative results that are clearly visible.
We're cutting this land up now and getting ready to plant it this summer, but we're leaving, large areas of swamp and palmetto land, and we're letting nature set the contour for us. We're not just going in here and taking rectangular blocks and saying we're going to improve this entire section and cut out a mile by mile strip.
One of the advantages in leaving wildlife corridors on the Williamson property is a vigorous deer population, estimated at 600 head, that provide supplemental income from hunting leases. Timely rotation of the cattle herd from one fenced area to another maintains high-quality pasture.
This is an example of the type of grass that we're trying to keep out. This is a smut grass, and under a rotational grazing process, the cows will harvest this grass too in the few days that they're in here in the large numbers. If we just left the gates open and let the cattle graze this as they wanted to, they would selectively graze the most desirable Hamarthria grass out, and they would leave these grasses and they would, propagate and really multiply and become a problem in our pastures. Rotational grazing is not as labor intensive as what we thought it was going to be originally. We rotate most of these cattle, through their 6-pasture or 5-pasture scheme using the pickup trucks. We just blow the horn and the cattle are ready to move after 3 or 4 days, and we pull them right into that other pasture. And if there's a few stragglers dragging along behind, we'll give them a day to catch up, and then we'll shut the gates. And if there's a couple pairs we leave behind, we'll pick them up on the next go-around.
Innovations like rotational grazing, strip cropping, and precision applications of water and nutrients will help American agriculture remain vigorous into the 21st century and beyond. A willingness to integrate new methods with the old is a common quality among the farmers we interviewed. Some are experimenting with new crops such as amaranth, and others are experimenting with biological solutions in place of chemical ones.
We use probiotics, which is the opposite of antibiotics. Probiotics are like lactobacillus, it's good organisms, like that you would find in yogurts. The good organisms we fortify, we add more good organisms to control the bad. Balance, rather than use antibiotics to kill all the organisms.
Innovations are also emerging from both farm workshops and farm equipment factories to meet the needs of sustainable farming.
For thousands of years, farmers have cultivated their crops to control weeds. At first, they used crude tools and wooden implements. Later on, metal tools. Find the oxes and horses to draw them with. As tractors are invented and were evolved, row crop cultivation took large steps forward. This cultivator is equipped with an electronic guidance system. As I'm cultivating now, this box over here on my right-hand side senses where the crop is and steers the cultivator to stay on the crop.
You can't argue with success. Several farmers we spoke with have proven the value of conservation practices over a span of half a century. One of them commented that good farming is not like baking a cake from a box. There are simply no shortcuts to quality or permanence. It takes careful management of resources and a thorough understanding of natural cycles to operate a farm that fits the land.
We came here in 1946, actually, and we had no money. We had $200 in the bank. We had to borrow every penny to buy the farm. We had a team of horses and some old machinery, and that's all. And now, after farming for 45 years, naturally, organically, and processing the food and adding the value that we do in taking these steps. We are now having sales of over $6 million a year.
No, you don't do this overnight, you know, fellows. What have we been at it, about 40, 50 years? You might say a lifetime. Actually, we call this upland irrigation. We don't have an irrigation well or nothing, but we're saving about all the rain we get. So when we got those heavy rains, anything that was covered up, we didn't have to worry about it. It was tied down. If we can save it, why not only is it helping us, but it's helping the fellow downstream. He tried all over his farm to get an irrigation well, and he couldn't. So he comes on up about 40 foot from us and sinks one and gets 800-gallon well. And I told him, hell, I said, we've been saving it for 40 years. We've kept building up the soil. And some of these farms, with the rains we had last spring, they lost a lot of topsoil. And you know, it'll never, what does it take? 100 years to build up an inch of topsoil?
If water is agriculture's lifeblood, soil is its body. In a single gram of soil, scientists have observed more organisms than there are people in China. Today's best farmers may not be able to see the life teeming in their soils, but they do know enough to nurture it by effectively using cover crops, rotations, and crop residues. Sustainable agriculture, what one farmer calls just damn good farming, is not a destination, but a continuing journey. Agriculture's links to policy, economics, and education will determine if that journey will be a smooth one.
My question to industry, are you listening? Is your new product development line, is your strategy dealing with this change in the attitude of the farmers out there, or is it business as usual?
This is, I think, the backbone of American agriculture is its land-grant university research program. And if we can get the support of the farmers in this program, we're going to go a long ways.
The farmer can have workshops or can have a field day on his farm to show other farmers, and that's the real key. The shortest link is farmer to farmer.
In America, we enjoy the benefits of abundant supplies of food and fiber. As a culture, we've also expressed the need for clean water and the protection of wildlife habitat. Practices like the ones we've seen can be a bridge between these important goals. The worldly aspects of policies in global commodity markets may drive agriculture, but in a very real sense, the most important products are the farms themselves. Most important to those farms is the farmer, each and every one.